Hi everyone, Janelle here. I'm a functional nutritionist and doctor of natural medicine. This is my podcast where we talk about midlife wellness in the mountains. Today I got to sit down with one of my favorite teachers and mentors, Andrea Nakayama, who also happens to be the founder of and former CEO of the Functional Nutrition Alliance. Andrea is leading thousands of students and practitioners around the globe in a revolution to offer better solutions to the growing chronic illness epidemic. By highlighting the importance of systems biology, root cause methodology, and therapeutic partnerships, she helps individuals reclaim ownership of their health. Today, I asked Andrea to join me on my podcast to discuss one of her new passions, the intriguing role narrative medicine plays in our healing journey. So many of us are hyper-focused on finding that supplement or protocol or lab test that is going to fix us. Andrea explains how understanding our own narratives, reflecting on our life experiences, emotions, and individual histories is often what we are missing. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Andrea. I am so happy to have you here today.
I am so excited to be here with you, Janelle. It's just, as I said, it's an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you so much. So I really appreciate what a brilliant thinker you are, Andrea. I love all of your clear frameworks and how you articulate and explain complex topics. And of course, I love everything I've learned from you in the functional nutrition world. But another thing I really appreciate about you is your ability to stay ahead of the curve in healthcare and to see what we're missing and then lead us into a new way of thinking and supporting people around their health. So thank you for doing all of that. But I asked you today to come and discuss narrative medicine and how it's an important part, but a missing part of the healthcare conversation, and more importantly, the healing journey. So first off, can you tell us what you were experiencing in the healthcare world that led you to find and move to narrative medicine?
Yeah, and thank you. I just feel so moved when I hear you say that and when I see our graduates moving on and doing such brilliant work. So I just feel so honored by that. For me, what I was seeing, what I started to realize was missing really goes back to my work as a functional medicine nutritionist. And as you know, I like to create a map for every individual and look at different sections that I would consider the story, the soup, and the skill. And the story in functional medicine are our antecedents, our triggers, our mediators, really looking at our life's journey, what brought us to where we are, what do we know about ourselves. The soup is the internal physiological terrain, the systems biology, and the skill are all the things we do, the sleep and relaxation, the exercise and movement, the nutrition and hydration. So those are my major categories that I'm looking at an individual through. And what I realized at first when I entered the field in 2009 is that there was such a huge focus on the skill. What do I do? What is it that I have to do? What diet? What exercise? Do I do CrossFit? Should I follow an autoimmune paleo diet? What do I do? And then I saw us move into this hyper fixation on the systems biology. The gut's connected to the brain. How do I fix my gut? How do I fix my hormones? What's wrong with me? Is it mold? Is it histamine intolerance? And this definite jump into looking for the root. And as I will always say, there is not one root for any chronic health challenge. And so as I was looking at this and I was working with more people and I started to see more patients who were sick and not getting better despite having worked with the top professionals, that what was missing was their story. And the story has a clear place in the foundational methods of functional medicine, but it's lost its way and gotten so fixated on the soup and the skill. And again, I'm using those as categories, the systems biology and the what do we do, that I started speaking more about how to learn about patients' story and where can I really dive in and understand the things that move us and are meaningful to us, and how we look back to understand how we move forward. In functional medicine, we pay heed to the timeline, really understanding if you tell me I have constipation or I never sleep, I want to understand that timeline. So, all of that brought me to recognize that there was something missing. And I went on my own quest for where is this talked about? I had known about narrative medicine, and we can talk more about that. But that is the journey as a functional medicine nutritionist, which I never want to leave behind, that led me to the importance of a narrative approach to medicine.
Yeah, it's so interesting because how you explained it, like we have a place for it in functional nutrition. I mean, there's this huge place for it, but we still focus so much on the systems biology, which is so fun, but there's a human behind that.
Yes.
And we do have that side that is about the story, but it's not where we focus our attention all the time. And it's not where the people we work with want to focus their attention at first.
Yes.
So,
And it
yeah,
influences that. Like we can't in on the functional nutrition matrix, as you know, Janelle, the soup, the systems biology, everything that's going on in our body is flanked by two areas that are influencing that center section being all the stuff that's going on within. So that flanking is our story and our skill. So the epigenetics, but also the factors that led us here. We cannot understand what got us here without looking at what got us here. And so for me, there's really this beautiful place where, as patients, we have this opportunity to go, oh, me, like, wait a minute, I'm here because this happened in my life, or this has continued to happen, or whoa, look at those connections. And once we make those, I think we have much more opportunity to heal. I also feel like we're missing parts of what I might consider nutrition, which actually exist within our story.
yeah, I am seeing this so much more, even in a group or one on one with people, that this is such a critical component of the story. And I'm just starting to learn how to weave it in a lot better. But before we go on, can you just give us a general definition of what narrative medicine is?
Yeah, I'm going to give you my definition. And I'm making that caveat because I think it's a very young field. It's a very academic field. And my use case, everybody's use case, is a little bit different. But narrative medicine is a field that came out of Columbia University. It's spread wider now, but it's a very academic and uh, it's a use case that's really thinking about how we as providers stop and engage with the humanities to exercise our muscle of engaging with the humanities in practice, right? Like, so the person we're talking to is human. If we engage with other areas that come from human expression, i.e., the arts, whether that's poetry, literature, dance, music, comedy, improv, paintings, film. When we stop and engage with the arts, we start to exercise a muscle of close listening. And that close listening allows us to see beyond the surface. And so when we're practicing in that academic, very it's a very like closed use case, I'm going to say, in that teaching of it. When we're engaging there, we are working together to see beyond our initial sight. So we are challenging bias at every turn. We then turn around and try to use that same muscle in our client relationships, patient relationships. So that's what narrative medicine is. It is an act of close listening, usually engaging the arts as an opportunity to exercise muscle that we can then use in practice. Again, young field, very academic use case. And when I say young, in its 20s as a field of being studied. What I'm really trying to do with it is see if we can exercise that same muscle as patients. Can I put these tools in the hands of patients as well as practitioners who I train? But can I also go forward and put these tools in the hands of patients to understand themselves better, to tune into their own bodies better? And that's because I think in our sympathetic dominant quest for fixes and answers to what ails us, we've stopped listening to what actually makes us feel better, makes us feel worse, where there are connections, and all of that exists within us. So I'm thinking of it as a tool that helps us to get in touch and trying to take it a little bit out of its pedagogical use case that it's used in primarily now.
So it's almost like it provides us an opportunity to take a pause and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and to not only see the individual or to know ourselves as an individual, but maybe like the humanities invite us into that different part of our brain that we can't be in when we're stressed, right? So I'm just thinking through this. So maybe that's one of its magical powers is that we come out of that sympathetic dominant brain. What's the fix? What do I do next? And we sink more into who am I? How do I feel? And that parasympathetic takes over, which feels wonderful. And we can just come into touch with all of that different side of our health and who we are. Do you think that's like part of why it's so magical and
I
helpful?
think I love that interpretation of it. And I think it's also understanding that things aren't so ordered,
Mm.
right? So in the last time that I was live for a narrative medicine workshop with other providers, there was a young woman who was just entering medical school and she was new to narrative medicine. And we were reading a poem together. I'm with all these different doctors, palliative care doctors, pediatricians, people doing research, different kinds of people in our group. And we're reading a poem. And this young woman who's the age of my son, entering medical school, said, I really just don't have a relationship with poetry. And I said to her, I didn't either. And that's what I love about it because it's chaos. Poetry is chaos. It's not a clear arc that goes, this is exactly what happens. It's not a protocol. It makes us engage and get a little uncomfortable with the human nature that we are hearing from our own stories, that as clinicians, we hear from our client and patient stories. So I think just using poetry or art as an example, if you're standing in front of a piece and you're like, Jackson Pollock or whatever, there's a lot to that story, but that doesn't make any sense to me. Sit with it. What does make sense? What do you see? What happens when you look more deeply? And what do you feel? And I think for me, we've lost that feeling. I'm obsessed with the question, what moves you? What moves you? Is it a commercial that you watch or a TV show or a movie or hearing your child play an instrument or perform on stage? Like, what is that feeling that washes over us? And how do we sit with that? Going back to what I said earlier, as a part of our healing, there's a story there. There's a narrative of why we're moved by different things, whether it's to tears or to joy and laughter, and what that does for our body, in addition to the supplement, the herb, the exercise routine, the sleep regime, whatever it is we're doing. So I think there's just a nuance there that I find really curative and really curious, and that is humanity.
Mm. So I have a couple questions just to help me clarify. First of all, I specialize in perimenopause and menopausal women. And I think there's so many things I would love to ask you about as far as narrative medicine goes and using it at this time in our life. But I'm curious when I hear you talking about the humanities and how we learn about ourselves and how we feel. So, do you think that I often use analogies about the moon and our moon cycles and how the growing moon and how the shrinking moon or the seasons, how fall, invites us to let go, and then winter invites us inside of ourselves, and spring is a renewal, and so on. So could that sort of be considered one of these tools also? It's not a poem, it's not a song, it's not things like that, but it feels to me similar.
Yeah, I think if we're asking the question, what do you see? What do you hear? How do you feel? Like if we're giving an analogy and it's something outside and we're not bringing it back inside, then it's that not that narrative. It's your narrative and you're giving me a narrative to relate my narrative of what's happening to my body to. But when we make it in the narrative medicine realm, we're really saying, how do I feel? What do I see? What do I hear?
Mhm.
And anchoring on this me part of the equation. So I know we use the word narrative in a lot of different ways
Mhm.
today. And I would say that, fact is something that's actually occurred. Perspective is a particular attitude, and you're giving me perspective with that analogy. Narrative is fact plus perspective, and
Mhm.
truth is when narrative is believed to be true. So, how do I take that analogy you're giving me? And how do you ask me something? Like when you think about the moon and your cycle, does anything resonate? Is anything true for you in that analogy? Or you could choose a story or a poem or a quote
Mhm.
and use that to express your analogy as a pause after your teaching, and then say, write for a minute about what comes to mind
Mhm.
for you. Anything goes. Draw a
Mhm.
picture of it's that self expression that brings us closer to self. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
That makes perfect sense.
It's so
Absolutely.
hard to explain, I think, unless you really experience it. And that's why I'm trying to offer opportunities for people to step in and they don't know they're entering an experience. They think they're coming to learn from me, and hopefully they're learning something from me, but I'm holding space for an internal experience, hopefully.
And can you just define one more time, why would someone wanna do that?
Yeah, I think there's a huge part of our healing that comes from that internal knowing. So, especially as we age, which is a real passion of mine, I'm really thinking there's a big flip to some of the ways that we're looking at aging. I think that we cannot know how to go forward unless we know where we've been. And I think where we've been lives within us. And there's a lot of wisdom and sage understanding. And again, it brings us more into the parasympathetic healing that can occur. So, what I'm going to say is that if somebody's biohacking and needs a fix for something and they're otherwise like in optimal health, then why engage with some of these deeper practices? I get that. However, what I'm seeing, and especially for women as we age, is that there's more of us who are struggling with symptoms that don't get better. And I think there's a desire to have a new understanding of how we go forward. And so this is an opportunity for us to sink into that. So the why for me really is about the who. And the who are those who, yeah, I've tried and tried and tried. That's not working. That's not working. That's not working. Or it's working this much. And then I'm still struggling here. Or how do I even think or orient to my life going forward?
Right. So then in this case, the humanities are a way to explore who we are and to encourage people to explore who they are so that they can understand their story better and how their personal narratives and how the experiences in their life have shaped everything up until now, and how we need to embrace that in our healing journey. Is that?
Yes, and it might take a leader, right? So we're asking ourselves questions: when, where, how do you feel? So I'll just give you some more tangible examples because this is a very theoretical
Mhm.
discussion. So if somebody were to come to me and say, like, I had a woman in my case study group in her 70s say to me, I've always had trouble sleeping. And I can take that as a provider and be like, okay, let's work on sleep. Sleep's important. What's happening? What's going on? But instead, I asked her, tell me the first time you remember it being a problem with sleeping. And she sat with that and she brought me back a photograph of her childhood home and told me a story about where the window was in her childhood bedroom and how that kept her kind of in this alert state because even though there was nothing wrong with the next door neighbor, they never did anything wrong. There were no curtains on that window. And that made her feel like she had to be hyper vigilant in her sleeping state because something could happen. And so she developed this response of not allowing herself to relax because she was constantly waking herself up in a hypervigilance. I never would have known that story. I asked her a question, which helped me bring her back to tell me the first time you remember it being an issue. Because her story was, I've always had trouble sleeping. If I take that at face value as a clinician or as myself, I've always been misunderstood. Nobody ever understood. Like, what are the stories I tell myself? And how do I stop and say, when is the first time I felt understood? When is the first time that this didn't feel like it was appreciated? Right. So I'm just asking myself a different set of questions that then helps me find the help and the resolutions that are more appropriate for my body's needs. So, in that state of sleep, she might need more nervous system come into relaxation. What does she need to feel calm and held and supported versus melatonin or passion flower or progesterone that we might rush to as a sleep fix? Does that help, that kind of reframe of taking us back in history as a tool to understand ourselves better because we walk around with a blank story about who we are and we take that for granted.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely really clarifying for me, and it sort of feels like a different part of narrative medicine. Like, we have that humanities part that we can learn about ourselves, but then we also have those stories we tell ourselves, which are so profound. And where I really see that come up is working with midlife women again. And, everyone wants a protocol, like you were saying. Is it progesterone? What is it? And I do find that what people feel the second half of life should look like, what the stories they've been told, what does being in menopause look like? What does it mean? What did my mom say it meant? What did my grandma say it meant? What does society tell me? Like, that is such a missing piece of the story that people just don't think about. And I think it could be a whole class on its own. But so does that sort of make
Yeah, I mean,
sense to you?
totally. I mean, I have to say that where my personal work is moving is towards this time of life. So, I'm nearing 60, so ahead of where you are. It's not premenopause, it's not menopause, it's postmenopause. And we are the first generation of women who are really, we've really been the done it all generation. And I see amongst my friends hitting 60, nobody wants to hire us anymore. We don't have meaning anymore. We're going through something that, sure, men have been through in hitting retirement age, but women are going through it for the first time in a different way. Our children are out of the house, our careers are taking a turn. And for me, this is where nutrition isn't just about what we eat, it's about our purpose and our meaning. And yes, there are 80-year-old women who paved the way, for us, but we are the women who were all paved the way for. And I am the first generation hitting that. So I believe that longevity means something very different than the stories and supplements and diets we're fed, and that it really has to do with purpose and meaning. And that to get back in touch with our purpose and meaning that we felt when we were little girls coming into this world, that we have to touch this narrative. And to me, again, when you're saying these are two different things, the stories we tell ourselves and the interaction with the interaction with the humanities is an opportunity to flex a muscle. And that muscle actually touches us. And then we have a little clue. Why did that touch me? Why did that bother me? Where did I get triggered in a good way or a bad way? I think you've heard me talk about like how, I'm obsessed with dancing now and going to my dance class. That's because I feel joy in that movement. And that is as much a part of my health and healing journey than any of the other things that I'm doing, not because it's exercise, but because it's joy. And that's another deficiency that I think we come into a lot of deficiencies as we age. And some of it is joy and meaning and purpose. And so again, I know, as you said to begin with, Janelle, I may be the one of the first ones bringing things forward. And in so doing, it's very unsexy. I get that we want the fix. We want the cure. We want to feel all better. And I'm here to say, mark my words, it's more than we think it is. And if we broaden our perspective, we will have more of an opportunity to move forward in a way that is more full and fulfilling than if we get more and more narrow in what we do and what we're looking for and what we're trying to be as we age.
Yeah, this is making so much sense. And I really love how you tied it back to the humanities help us understand more of who we are. And it seems even more important to really address this narrative medicine component in midlife because we are new people. We emerge into a new person when we have all those lower hormone, so that experiencing again, who are we now? What are we moved by now? What brings us joy now? What brings us pain and sadness and all of these things, addressing it again in midlife. We probably didn't do it normally, but addressing it again is really an important part of the journey.
And
So
it's these little pieces. It's like sitting with the little pieces and kind of like holding them. I don't know if we have time for a story, but it's really recognizing even in a day, what moves me, what really touched me, and recognizing that and allowing ourselves not to just gloss past it because that's a big piece of our healing in there because it's another little nugget that we can metabolize more deeply and bring forward with us.
and wouldn't we all feel wonderful just knowing that? And I'm a list maker. So I'm always telling people, make a list of what brings you joy. And I'm going to add, make a list of the things that move you and put that list on your fridge and do those things. Cause even hearing you explain that makes me feel better. And I was when you were saying that, I was picturing, what if our physicians did that? What if our physicians said, what moves you and what brings you joy? Is that medicine? What is medicine? It's such this deep thing, but I think everyone would be better. Everyone would feel better and we'd all, because it impacts that system's biology in so many ways. So this is
Yes.
so fascinating. And I'm so happy that you're leading us into this and explaining this to us. And I'm so grateful to think on this other plane about healthcare and healing and how this is such an important part that we're missing.
Well, thank you for embracing it. I know it's necessary and I know it's not an easy pill to swallow, but it's actually just so resonant. I think when we do, we can put down the torches that we're carrying and recognize that we can go more slowly, that we can savor the moments, and that's really, if we look at the blue zones, it's not just about what they ate. It's not just about these things that we're looking to capture and bottle. it's actually about having purpose and meaning and resonance with the outside world, with family, with community. And those things really matter. And so I just am a big stand for how we embrace not just the soup and the skill, but wait a minute, don't forget the story.
Yeah, and who that person is. So, did we have time for a story? Do you have
Oh,
one?
I was just thinking, Janelle, like I just was sitting the other day with, this is last week, and I was driving home from dance class. It's raining. It's Portland, Oregon. The lights are on. Do we have time for a story before I tell
I
them?
will happily make time for a story.
And I get a text message from my son's phone that says, like, emergency. You're receiving this text because you're Gilbert's emergency contact. So I'm like, okay, what does that mean? I try to call his phone, no answer. So he has a roommate now, a housemate. He lives in New York. And I call his housemate and I'm like, hey, I just got this message. And she's like, oh, he dropped his phone in water today. He's out to dinner with our other friend from college and his mom. And I'm like, oh, I know so and so's mom. I can call her. And she's like, no, I'll just call so and so. I'll just call the friend. And I had this experience that day and the next day when I asked Gilbert about that experience of going out to dinner with the friend. He was actually with their family. And I had this feeling of how he's included. Like he has his own life with his own friends. There's people looking out for each other. He's included in his best friend's family gathering in New York. He has a roommate that knows where he is and what happened. All of that is very minor and doesn't mean a lot. But in me, I felt this just joy and pride and comfort in knowing how embraced my young adult son is in his life. And I couldn't explain it, but it was this feeling that really just gave me a comfort that I just wanted to like hold and be able to tell. And I recognize like that's one of those things that puts my entire nervous system out of the alarm of the worrying parent, which we are all the time once we find out we're pregnant, and into this acceptance of this next phase, right? Of a piece of this next phase. So I don't know if that story resonates for anybody, but it's those minor moments that seem so mundane that actually, and it started with an emergency text, but ended with the opposite of that, ended with comfort and security and stability and pride that like I've raised a human who's cherished in the world he's creating. And so I just share that as like how it doesn't have to be like I drove to watch the most perfect sunset. It can be these mundane, everyday moments that actually feed and fuel us if we can slow down and take the time to savor them.
Yeah, and even just your mindfulness of how important those moments are probably changed your whole experience of it. Because it could have happened to you and you kept driving, but you recognize that I moved.
Yeah.
This feels big.
The feels.
And
Yeah.
so then you can marinate in that more, just knowing that those moments are so important. And so I think that is probably really a tangible thing for people to walk away with. Just that ability to pause. Wow. Okay. That felt, and I'm going to sit with this for a little bit.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love that you shared that story for so many reasons, but I do think that's a great tangible takeaway. So is there anything else you want to add? You've shared so much and you're really helping clarify this for me. Anything else before we part ways?
Well, I know there will be more questions. I know it's a difficult realm to understand, and that's just the umbrella name, but really does come down to this feeling. And if anybody's interested, in experiencing a narrative medicine workshop and what it's like to go like, what am I showing up for? I will continue to offer those hopefully quarterly on my personal website because it's a great practice for me to invite people into this opportunity to get in their feels, to feel what they feel, to see where feeling takes them. And so, yeah, please do join me for a workshop if that's of interest. And hopefully, I can continue to put some clarity and function behind this work.
Yeah, I did join one of those, Andrea, and it was about the dolphin noises, and it was so moving, and it felt good. So I will recommend people reach out to you, and I'm going to ask you where they can do that in a second. But it really felt great to be taken on this journey and to see how it made me feel. So thank you for that. And where can people find you?
Yeah, if you go to andreanakayama.com and you sign up for my newsletter, you will learn about those workshops and on all the social places, Andrea Nakayama.
Great. And we always teach people to stay curious. So this is a great place for people to stay curious. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Janelle.
Bye bye. That's it for this week. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a comment and a review as that helps it reach more people. You can find me and the courses I teach, the Midlife Hormone Club and the Energy Club, online at Mountain Rebalance. I help midlife women understand their body and age better. If that sounds like you, please join my newsletter. And if there's a topic you'd like me to cover here or an expert you want me to have on, let me know. In the meantime, keep playing, and here's to aging our best.